Hidden deep in the Louisiana countryside, bordered by the mighty Mississippi River, lies one of the most notorious correctional institutions in American history, the Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola Prison. With a history rooted in slavery, brutality, and resilience, Angola has become a powerful symbol of the American prison system. The land where Angola Prison sits was once a massive slave plantation. It was named after the African country from which many enslaved people were taken. After the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, Louisiana, like many southern states, sought ways to maintain forced labor. In 1880, former Confederate Major Samuel James leased the land and began using prisoners, many of whom were black men convicted of petty crimes, to work the fields. This system, known as convict leasing, was often described as slavery by another name. By 1901, the state of Louisiana took direct control of the property and officially established it as the Louisiana State Penitentiary. Over the decades, Angola grew into the largest maximum security prison in the United States, sprawling over 18,000 acres, larger than the island of Manhattan. Its size earned it the nickname, the Alcatraz of the South. Throughout the 20th century, Angola developed a dark reputation. It was plagued by violence, overcrowding, racial segregation, and inhumane conditions. Inmates were often forced to work long hours in cotton and sugarcane fields under armed supervision, echoing the practices of its slave-era roots. Reports of beatings, lack of medical care, and cruel punishments became common. In the 1950s and 60s, Angola was known as one of the most dangerous prisons in America. Inmates dubbed it the bloodiest prison in the South. Riots, stabbings, and murders were frequent. In 1971, a lawsuit by inmate Herman Wallace and others led to major civil rights reforms after federal courts ruled that conditions at Angola constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Despite some reforms, Angola remained a symbol of mass incarceration, especially for black men in America. More than 70% of its population today is African American, and many inmates are serving life without parole. Some have spent decades behind bars for crimes committed in their youth. In recent years, Angola has gained attention for its efforts at rehabilitation. The prison hosts educational programs, a hospice for terminally ill inmates, and even the Angola Prison Rodeo, an event open to the public where inmates compete in wild rodeo games. Yet critics argue these programs cannot erase the legacy of injustice and the disproportionate sentences still being served. Angola remains both a place of punishment and paradox. It reflects the transformation of slavery into incarceration and the deep racial and economic inequalities that persist in the U.S. criminal justice system. From a plantation to a prison, Angola's story is a haunting chapter in America's ongoing struggle with race, justice, and redemption. Angola has a legacy of brutality stretching from its origins as a slave plantation to its darkest days in the 1970s and beyond. It earned the chilling title, America's Bloodiest Prison, where murders, stabbings, and gang violence were tragically routine. On April 17, 1972, a kitchen worker guard named Brent Miller, a member of a storied local family, was fatally stabbed during a work stoppage in Angola's main kitchen. Miller's death erupted into national headlines. Reports revealed a prison in chaos. Between 1972 and 1975, at least 40 inmates were stabbed to death and over 350 suffered serious wounds. Miller's murder became the government's justification for isolating political inmates. 3 imprisoned Black Panthers, Herman Wallace, Albert Woodfox, and Robert Hillary King, were charged for Miller's death and sent to decades-long solitary confinement. Their supporters argued innocence, citing coerced witnesses and COINTELPRO tactics aimed at crushing prison political movements. This became the infamous Angola 3 saga. Their ordeal stands as one of the starkest examples of prolonged solitary confinement and potential miscarriage of justice in U.S. history. The violence prompted federal oversight. In 1975, a judge declared Angola's conditions unconstitutional, initiating decades of reform. Warden John Whitley, 1990 to 1995, implemented initiatives to reduce violence through incentives, education, and transparency. Later, Burl Cain introduced breakthrough programs like the Hospice Initiative, which fostered inmate cooperation and further reduced murder rates. Despite interventions, brutality resumed in December 1999, when inmates staged a violent armed attempt in the education building. A female staffer was taken hostage, and tragically, Guard Captain David Napham was found bludgeoned to death with a rubber mallet. Warden Cain personally de-escalated the situation, but was confronted with gruesome violence. 2 inmates were killed, 2 received death sentences, 2 were given life terms, and authorities spent an estimated $8 million on prosecutions. From the chaos of the 1970s to the scandalous captivity of the Angola III and the shocking late 90s killing of Captain Napa, Angola's history underscores a brutal cycle of violence. Yet its transformation, through oversight, humane leadership, education, and hospice programs, marks a powerful arc toward reform. Documentaries like The Farm, Angola, USA, 1998, the follow-ups, The Farm, 10 Down, 2009, and NPR's 36 Years of Solitary spotlight this evolution of violence, mortality, political repression, and humanity within prison walls. They chronicle men fighting not only for survival, but for dignity and eventual redemption amid a place haunted by blood and suffering. The Louisiana State Penitentiary, widely known as Angola, stands today as a stark testament to the lasting harm wrought by neglect, violence, and isolation. Built on the grounds of a former plantation, this sprawling maximum security prison has long struggled with systemic failures in healthcare and mental health care, a reality that deaf ears and closed gates have too often ignored. At Angola, healthcare is routinely described in court rulings as abhorrent and even cruel and unusual punishment. A 2015 class action lawsuit, cited in a 2023 federal ruling, revealed staggering neglect, strokes ignored until paralysis, fevers left untreated until death, and cancer left to progress untreated for years. Staff shortages mean that emergency medical technicians, whose training spans as little as 140 hours, stand between inmates and vital care. When patients are even suspected of malingering, they may face punishment and solitary confinement, a mechanism that repeatedly spreads mental anguish and physical deterioration. Mentally, Angola's population carries deep wounds. Many endure prolonged isolation, sentences of up to 23 hours a day in cells so small they amount to sensory deprivation. Juveniles, some as young as 14, have been subjected to solitary confinement for days, shackled during recreation, and deprived of education and meaningful social contact despite federal protections. Their testimonies reveal a bloodiest prison reputation, all but alive in the mental toll it continues to exact. Yet within Angola's bleak walls, fragile beams of rehabilitation endure. Born from crisis, the Angola Prison Seminary blends faith-based mentoring with peer counseling. Inmates training as ministers provide pastoral support, counseling, and spiritual guidance to fellow men as they navigate daily despair. Meanwhile, the hospice program, captured in the documentary Serving Life, sees long-term inmates nurturing the dying, sewing quilts, building coffins, and providing compassion when bodies and souls are at their weakest. These programs, while not nearly enough to offset systemic failures, show how stripped-back humanity can sow small moments of dignity. Recent court rulings have finally forced federal oversight onto Angola's crumbling healthcare system. Special masters are now scrutinizing its physician staffing, disability accommodations, and treatment standards. This marks a pivotal shift, one that acknowledges inmates' rights are constitutional, even behind bars. Angola remains emblematic of America's broader incarceration crisis. Rising inmate deaths, up 50% in recent years, underscore a prison system in crisis. Yet mental health care, medical rights, and humane treatment are not privileges. They are the bedrock of justice. Angola's fate, perhaps, will stand as a testament to whether justice can truly heal even in the darkest places, or whether, without compassion, the past continues to be a living sentence. Behind the towering fences and razor wire of Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola, lies a hidden battlefield, a place where loyalty is life, betrayal is death, and control is everything. Over the decades, Angola has been home to some of the most brutal gang wars in American prison history. Conflicts not just for survival, but for dominance over the prison's underground economy, racial power structures, and criminal alliances. Angola, often dubbed the Alcatraz of the South, has long housed the worst of the worst, murderers, lifers, and gang leaders who bring their street feuds behind bars. Here, the violence is silent and swift, planned over months and executed in seconds. Inmates use homemade weapons, code language, and brutal tactics, often right under the watchful eye of prison guards. One of the earliest and most violent gang wars in Angola erupted in the 1970s, when black militant groups, including members of the Black Guerrilla family, clashed with white supremacist inmates aligned with groups like the Aryan Brotherhood. These ideological wars weren't just about turf. They were about identity, race, and revolution. Inmates were stabbed, beaten, and even burned in retaliation hits that cycled for years. In the 1990s, as national street gangs like the Bloods and Crips began to rise in Louisiana, they brought their deadly rivalry into Angola. Fights erupted in cell blocks, recreation yards, and even during church services. Entire dorms were locked down as Crips and Bloods fought for control over the prison's drug trade, tobacco smuggling, and gambling rings. What started as fistfights soon turned into coordinated ambushes involving shanks, razor blades, and even boiling liquids thrown during attacks. The 2000s saw an evolution in gang warfare at Angola. The rise of hybrid gangs from Baton Rouge and New Orleans, sets like the Young Melf Mafia, G-Strip, and Nine Trey Bloods, brought a new kind of violence. These gangs were younger, less disciplined, and more unpredictable. Their wars weren't based on ideology, but on respect, retaliation, and control of resources. Inmates were slashed in the face as warnings. Others were killed for refusing to pay protection fees or for talking to rival groups. Perhaps the most infamous war occurred in 2011, when a multiracial brawl broke out between the Aryan Brotherhood, Bloods, and gangster disciples over contraband territory in the education building. The incident left several inmates hospitalized and forced the prison into full lockdown. It was a grim reminder that gang wars in Angola don't die, they adapt. Today, Angola remains a powder keg of tension. Though the administration uses segregation, surveillance, and gang task forces to manage violence, the wars still simmer. In a prison built on the grounds of a former slave plantation, where time moves slowly and anger never fades, gangs continue to rule in the shadows. The most brutal wars in Angola weren't always the loudest. They were the ones that never ended. Wars fought in whispers, settled in blood, and remembered by the scars left behind. The life of David Brown. In the shadows of Louisiana's most feared penitentiary, Angola Prison, David Brown became both a symbol of resistance and a reflection of America's deepest systemic failures. Affiliated with the Black Guerrilla family, Brown entered Angola in the 1970s, convicted of armed robbery and suspected in connection with prison-related violence. But what followed was more than just another inmate serving time. It was the forging of a militant, politicized prisoner fighting a silent war behind bars. Born in the turbulent 1950s, Brown grew up during the height of the civil rights struggle. Racial injustice, police brutality, and economic disparity carved his path to the streets and later into the arms of the BGF, a prison gang that viewed itself not only as a criminal organization, but also as a revolutionary force. Influenced by the teachings of George Jackson and the writings of Malcolm X, Brown entered Angola with more than just survival in mind. He was committed to organizing, resisting, and pushing back against what he viewed as a modern-day plantation. Angola, often dubbed the Alcatraz of the South, was notorious for its brutal conditions, racial segregation, and violent internal politics. Brown quickly aligned himself with the prison's black radical element, calling out the injustices suffered by inmates, from slave-like labor practices to institutionalized abuse. His cell became a classroom where he taught younger inmates about history, law, and resistance. But his leadership came at a price. Brown spent years in solitary confinement, isolated for his writings, his influence, and his alleged involvement in organizing hunger strikes and work stoppages. Authorities viewed him as a threat, not just to security, but to the very structure of Angola's order. Over time, Brown became both a political prisoner and a folk hero among incarcerated men who saw in him a voice for the voiceless. Though the system tried to silence him, his words leaked out through letters and interviews, shedding light on the harsh realities inside one of America's most feared prisons. David Brown's story is one of revolution, repression, and resilience. In a prison built to crush spirits, he fought not just to survive, but to awaken the minds of others. His life behind bars became a quiet rebellion, echoing through the steel gates of Angola, long after his cell went dark. The life of Kirksey Nix. Deep in the heart of Louisiana's Angola State Prison, one of America's most notorious crime figures waged a criminal empire from behind bars. His name was Kirksey McCord Nix Jr., a ruthless and calculating leader of the Dixie Mafia, whose influence reached far beyond the prison gates. Born in 1943 in Mississippi, Kirksey Nix was raised in the chaos of the Deep South's underworld. By the late 1960s, he had become a feared enforcer and hitman, known for cold-blooded violence and unwavering loyalty to the Dixie Mafia, a loosely organized but deadly crime syndicate that ruled parts of the South through gambling, extortion, contract killings, and political corruption. In 1972, Nix was convicted of the contract murder of Frank Corso, a New Orleans grocery executive, and sentenced to life without parole. He was shipped off to Angola, one of the most violent and racially segregated prisons in the country. But for Kirksey Nix, prison wasn't the end. It was just another battlefield. From within Angola's iron walls, Nix orchestrated a complex criminal operation known as the Lonely Heart Scam. Using charm and deception, he and his associates conned wealthy individuals through love letters, posing as vulnerable prisoners seeking relationships. The scam brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars, fueling bribes, luxuries, and power inside Angola and beyond. But Nix's reach extended even further. In the late 1980s, federal investigations uncovered a murder-for-hire plot tied to Nix and several associates, including corrupt Louisiana Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret, who were gunned down in 1987. It would take years, but Nix was eventually indicted for orchestrating the hits from behind bars, using loyal lieutenants to carry out the deadly plan. Kirksey Nix turned Angola into his own command center, a place where bars couldn't stop influence and walls couldn't contain ambition. His cell was more than a cage. It was the headquarters of a criminal mastermind who blended Southern charm with cold-hearted violence. Today, Nix remains in federal custody, a shadow of the man who once ruled a slice of the Dixie underworld from within America's bloodiest prison. His life is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous gangsters wear prison uniforms, and their empires never truly die, they just go underground. The life of Anthony Bell. In the heart of Louisiana's gang-infested streets, Anthony "Tony" Bell rose through the ranks of the Bloods, carving out a reputation for fearlessness, violence, and loyalty. Born and raised in the rough neighborhoods of Baton Rouge, Bell was a product of a broken system, trapped between poverty, crime, and survival. By the time he was a teenager, Tony Bell had already become a known figure on the streets, running with a local blood set that controlled parts of North Baton Rouge. Bell's criminal record quickly grew: armed robbery, drug trafficking, weapons charges, and by his early 20s, he was sentenced to serve decades inside Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola. But Angola wasn't the end of the road for Bell. Instead, it became the place where his street influence evolved into organized prison power. Inside Angola, Bell was identified as a ranking member of the Bloods, possibly connected to the 9-tray set, known for its structure and militaristic discipline. Despite the tight security and harsh conditions, Bell continued to exert control, communicating with the outside world, recruiting younger inmates, and establishing influence across racial and gang lines. Authorities at Angola noted Bell's role in coordinating internal rackets, including contraband smuggling, extortion, and controlling gambling operations. His charisma and ability to lead made him a key player in keeping the Bloods organized within the prison's harsh environment. But that power didn't come without violence. Bell was suspected in several stabbings, orchestrated lockdown disturbances, and was once caught with detailed hit lists during a high-profile gang sweep in Angola. Despite spending years in segregated housing and under surveillance, Tony Bell never lost his grip. Guards described him as cold but calculated, rarely speaking unless necessary, but always pulling strings from the shadows. Tony Bell's story is not just one of gang violence. It's a story of how America's most dangerous prisons become breeding grounds for power, control, and influence. Angola may have been designed to break men, but for Bell, it became a battlefield, a place where the red flag of the Blood still flew, even behind 18-foot walls. To this day, Bell remains a name whispered in Angola's cell blocks, a symbol of gang loyalty, prison politics, and the lasting reach of street empires, even behind bars.